Seventeen was the first of the teen magazine genre and helped launch an industry that shaped the newly emerging concept of the teenager since its first issue in 1944. These magazines tell young adults what to wear, the best makeup to buy, and how to get the guy. The industry, which really began to boom in the 1990s, is overwhelmingly targeted towards young females. Teen magazines began to cultivate a community of young women by presenting the idea of what a teenager should be, how they should dress, act, what they should be interested in, and more. All of these messages are pushed on the reader with the help of advertisements, and the products being promoted adapt with the culture of the time. 17 magazine is a perfect example of this. 17 has grown with their reader base. In its infancy, during the height of World War II, the magazine gave girls advice of how they could do their part to help the boys abroad. Today, the boy advice still exists, with more fashion and beauty advice than how to purchase war bonds. According to a 2006 report by the Magazine Publishers of America, 78% of teens read magazines, and with over 70 different publications specifically targeted at teens to choose from, this media form is hard to avoid. Despite the decline of the print magazine, with the rise of online content and digital publications, magazines like Teen Vogue and 17 are still consumed by teenagers on a daily basis. But reader subscriptions are not enough to keep magazines in the black. Magazines need to sell advertisements in between their glossy spreads to turn a profit. Although these magazines fulfill a need in the industry for easily accessible content for teens, it presents an ethical dilemma when advertisements are camouflaged as content, especially when their readership is so easily influenced. Lisa Farman is an assistant professor of strategic communications at Ithaca College and an expert on the ethics and media effects of advertising.
There's a struggle in the media world between needing advertisers to pay the bills, right? So journalists need advertising so that the newspapers can keep running. But at the same time, once we start to blur the lines between journalistic integrity and advertising, I think we get a lot of questioning.
Sarah Grunberg, instructor in the Department of Sociology, believes that the advertisements and content that goes into teen magazines speaks to the overall structure of American society.
I think we live in a very particular kind of capitalist system. The kind of capitalism that exists in our society is, in the United States, I think, is based upon I guess maybe just like this instant gratification, likes, getting something, consuming things, and getting more and more and more, not feeling satisfied. So there's kind of a relationship between like what we're seeing in the magazines and capitalism, right?
Like any other career, journalism is an industry, so making money is valued. But because of the relationship between writers and their audience, it's imperative that journalists consider ethical codes in their work.
I think advertising of all the types of media probably has the most ethical gray area. And I think a big reason advertising gets criticized is because sometimes advertisers cross the line when it comes to ethics.
Farman mentioned that differentiating between actual content and advertisements is not as cut and dry as one may think. The way that many teen magazines present spreads with headlines like "Check out the latest fall fashion" or "How to achieve the best look for prom" is one example of this. Although this may look like editorial content at face value, more often than not the products are being sponsored and the spread is actually just a collection of advertisements. You can see here in a 17 magazine spread, two facing pages are both advertising clothing for different occasions. On the left, summer festival fashion, and on the right, prom dresses. In print on the edges of the pages are the prices of each article of clothing the model is wearing and where to find it. When young girls are flipping through this magazine, these outfits may catch their eye. All they have to do is look a little closer and they can read exactly where to find them. This sort of hidden advertising can be especially harmful when specifically targeting young audiences. Grunberg says that the media targets vulnerable audiences, like teens, by telling them they must have certain products in order to fit in and be good enough.
We're taught to really hate our bodies, to think, like we have all of these imperfections and flaws, right? And who does that serve, right? Who does that benefit in our society? Of course, it benefits the individuals who can sell us products to try to fix all of those things.
However, 17 and Teen Vogue contributor Marissa Miller doesn't necessarily think that promoting products through fashion spreads is unethical.
Right. I know the line between, editorial and advertorial is so blurred these days that it's really hard as a reader to distinguish what has been paid for and what hasn't been. But I personally get a lot of press releases every day for these teen magazines asking me to promote their products and stuff, and I make it very clear that I'm not a walking billboard. So sometimes I've actually spoken to many editors at Teen Vogue, at 17, at Cosmo, and I've asked them, what do you do when publicists send you their products? And we all say that we cannot guarantee publication. But of course, if it happens to fit the bill of something we're right about, we're happy to include it. Just because, a prom dress roundup doesn't have the same ethical implications as, let's say, reporting on, Wall Street.
Nonetheless, the impact of writing to a vulnerable target audience like teen girls is clear. Farman and Grunberg believe that the way content is presented in teen magazines further perpetuates the harmful expectations for young girls that already exist.
Part of the problem is that because teen girls, they're already surrounded by messaging in just their social circle, right? About, peer pressure, who's cool, who's not cool. And then teen magazines exacerbate that. So they purposely focus on that type of content, and they focus on, for a teen audience, they focus on, are you sexy enough, and what does he want, and the types of, you can picture magazine headlines, that's intentional. So they're trying to kind of prey on the vulnerability of the teen girl.
They're reinforcing gender roles. They're reinforcing our understandings about relationships and monogamy. I think that they're reinforcing what women should be interested in. If you look at men's magazines and women's magazines, there's, women should be interested in men. Men should be interested in what's going on in the world, right? Or how to build things or whatever, right? So there isn't that reciprocity that's happening.
When writing, Miller takes the potential vulnerability of her audience into account.
I still hold these beliefs today that I had formulated when I was a young teen reading these magazines. So I know how much impact I can have, and so I watch my words really, really carefully.
Most of Miller's work is for outlets like Teen Vogue and 17, but she also writes for publications directed at an adult audience. Naturally, Miller molds her writing depending on the publication she is writing for.
Young people are a lot smarter than we think. So the main thing I do is try not to undermine my audience. People can tell when they're being spoken down to, and the last thing that teens or millennials need is, that kind of treatment, since they're already getting it from their teachers, they're already getting it from their parents. So what I try to do is really, speak to them, not at them. So what I mean by that is, there'll be, I'll contextualize my arguments, but I won't give them the kind of dictionary definitions of what I'm trying to say, because a lot of them are a lot more well-read than we think.
The issue at hand is that camouflage advertising is editorial content. The most clear value of the industry when including these hidden ads is money. The promotion of certain products garners money from those companies. On the other hand, our values as journalists include truth and transparency, which could be at stake when using hidden ads. The Federal Trade Commission, or FTC, regulates advertisements in the United States. When it comes to advertisements in magazines, the FTC is specific about the line that is drawn between ads and editorial content. According to its 1983 policy statement on deception, if an advertisement would influence a consumer's decision, it would be considered deceptive or misleading. The Commission specifically states that advertising and promotional messages that are not identifiable as advertising to consumers are deceptive if they mislead consumers into believing they are independent, impartial, or not from the sponsoring advertiser itself. The ethical dilemma for magazines and teen magazines in particular is that they do exactly what the FTC advises them not to. These magazines aren't clear when an ad is an ad, instead using ambiguous language such as presented by. This completely deceives their young readers. A reader of one of these publications may not be able to decipher between the sponsored ads and the actual articles. The lines become even more blurred when ads are woven into the articles. Companies send magazines their products hoping that the magazines will try them and subsequently feature the product in a future issue. So, it might seem like a 17 writer loved that new liquid lipstick, but they might not have even looked at the cosmetic line had it not been sent to 17. When looking at these issues through the lens of the Potter box, it is easy to break down the values of ad agencies versus the values we as journalists operate by. We explored the differences between the values of advertisers in teen magazines and ours as journalists. The main dilemma in advertising for teen magazines is that these ads can be camouflaged as other articles. Magazines value advertisement because that is what pays the bills. We, on the other hand, hold a higher value for the truth and being transparent. A young reader may not be able to tell the difference between an ad and an article. Magazines follow Rand's ethical principle of rational self-interest. They are only selling the ads to collect revenue. We would follow Aristotle's golden mean. We acknowledge that advertisements are necessary for magazines to be successful, but at the same time, this should not come at the cost of the reader who sees these ad and article hybrids. Magazine companies and their employees are loyal to themselves as well as money. As has been previously stated, advertisements are essential for magazines' livelihoods. We think in addition to these loyalties, magazines should be mindful of their impressionable audience. Teen magazine publishers ultimately choose to publish advertisements that look like articles. We think that instead of pushing products without the reader realizing it, magazine writers should make it very clear as to what is a sponsored advertisement and what is not. As much as we, as journalists, are responsible for following ethical codes, we must also take it upon ourselves to make sure our employers are following the standards that they have set.
You should also kind of like evaluate if like your news organization is doing something that's like shady or iffy. Like I think you should also ask questions and be outspoken about what kind of news practices you think are not, like kosher that are going on around you. It's not only on the onus of the reporter, but the organization as well.
Learning about journalistic ethical codes will give future journalists, like ourselves, the ability to recognize an ethical dilemma when it occurs and hopefully do something to solve it.